Maintaining and optimizing Windows Vista. As good as Windows Vista is, like all previous versions of Windows, there are certain steps you can take to ensure that Windows is performing at its very best. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the tools and applications that you can use to find out what's going on within your operating system. And in the second half of this video, we'll talk about things you can do to make sure Windows Vista is running well. Alright, so let's get started. So we'll go and click on Start and we'll launch the control panel. And then we'll go to System and Maintenance. And down the bottom, we'll choose Administrative Tools. Now this is rather a long way of going about getting to our administrative tools. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this down and we'll right click on our Start menu and select Properties. And then the Customize button. And we'll scroll down and we'll choose to display these on our All Programs menu and the Start menu. And we'll click on OK and OK again. And now we'll find our administrative tools are right here for easy access. Okay, so we're going to launch the Reliability and Performance Monitor, and this is the new updated Vista version of the old Performance Monitor tool that we saw back in earlier versions of Windows. Alright, well, we'll click Continue on our user account control message. Alright, well, the first thing you'll probably notice here in our Reliability and Performance Monitor is these four graphs here at the top. And what we have here on this opening screen is basically what I refer to as a super task manager. You see, when you right-click on the taskbar and open up the task manager, across these tabs here you can view the memory, the network, and so on. Now in this new console, Vista takes this information one step further. Now obviously at a quick glance here you can see a graphical representation of what's happening on your computer, but if you click on any of these graphs, this will expand the bottom section of the console and display more information about whatever graph that you clicked on. Now in this case I've just selected the CPU, and in the bottom you can see the processes that are running on this Vista computer. We can see the process ID, a description of the process, the threads associated with the process, and the percentage of CPU time each thread is currently using, as well as the average CPU time for each process over the last 60 seconds. Now notice here in the CPU bar, it shows the CPU here in green and a maximum CPU in blue. Now this green section here is a live representation of our actual CPU usage as it's happening right now, whereas this blue section is showing the maximum amount of CPU available. Now it might seem strange to show this as 100%, but when you're running this console on a notebook that supports lowering the CPU speed to maximize battery performance, you're going to see this drop based on what Windows is doing with the CPU. So if you're running Vista on a notebook, come in here and take a look when you set your notebook to a low power mode, and you'll see the CPU maximum speed drop to a lower percentage. So at least you can see if your low power computer mode is in fact working. Now since we've currently got the CPU selected, if we click on the CPU graph again, it's going to collapse this bottom section. So let's click on the disk graph and we'll be able to see what processes are being accessed by the hard disk. And you'll see things like the current read and write speeds. And I really like this feature since it's typical with Windows systems that the hard disk gets thrashed a lot. And so by coming in here, you're able to find out what processes are making that disk churn. And under this I/O priority column, you can also see if the process is a normal one or one that's running in the background. And we can see a background one here. And you'd expect to see things like the indexing service running in the background. Okay, well the next section we've got here is the networking section, which I personally like since it's kind of a cross between the Task Manager graphical display and the NetStat command. So here you can see which applications are talking to which systems, whatever they may be. So if I go and open up Internet Explorer here behind the scenes, and I'll just minimize it, you'll note that the networking section here shows us the connections as they're happening. So this is yet another tool at your disposal to help you identify not only poor network performance, but also to find out what connections are currently being made to and from your computer. Now in the memory section, this shows you a similar view to what you'd expect to see in the Task Manager. You can see the process ID, how much memory these processes are using. And one thing I'd like to see here though is the ability to be able to right click on these entries and to be able to terminate them, but you can't have everything I guess, and you can of course still terminate processes using our old Task Manager anyway. Now on the left hand side of this console, under the Monitoring Tools folder, we have the Performance Monitor, which a lot of you guys watching this video would instantly recognize from previous versions of Windows. Now here we can see the default Performance Monitor object is showing the CPU utilization on this computer, and like in previous versions of Performance Monitor, we can then add more objects to our graph and monitor practically any part of the Vista operating system, as well as applications that also add their support for performance monitoring, and I'm talking about applications like IIS and SQL Server, and of course many others. Now there's really two ways of collecting data about your system. One is to use this graph here, which shows it in real time, to see what's happening on your computer right now, and of course that can help you troubleshoot a problem that's occurring right now on your PC. But if the problem's deeper than that, you may want to collect data over a period of time for analysis later on. Now either way, you can do that right here. So we can right click and choose to add counters, or we can come over here and click on this green plus icon at the top, and then we can add in as many counters as we like. So if we scroll up here, let's choose one of the popular counters such as disk or memory. In fact, let's choose this logical disk counter here. So we'll select that, and you can either expand this by clicking on this little down arrow icon here and then choosing a specific counter, or you can select the entire group by selecting the top here. Now since there are so many counters in Vista by default, and many more once you install other applications on your computer, you probably really won't know what all of them do. So if you select a counter and then click on the Show Description button at the bottom, right at the bottom of this window, you can then see a brief description about what the specific counter does. So that can help you locate something you want. Okay, so let's add in the entire logical disk group here. So we'll select the group, and in the window below we can specify which disk we want these counters to run against. Now, since I only have a single hard disk in this system, it doesn't really make any difference in my situation. But when you have multiple drives, you can either select a single drive, such as our C drive or D drive or whatever you like, or you can select all instances, or show a total or average across all drives. So it doesn't matter what I select here, since I really only have a single drive. So I'm going to leave the default here at total, and we'll click on the Add button, and we can see here that all logical disk counters are now being added. Now if we want to add in more counters at this stage, we most certainly can. You just follow the same procedure as we did when we added our logical disk counters, and when you're done, simply click on OK. Alright, now that we've added our counter, there's a couple of minor but welcome changes to this view from what we've seen in previous versions of Performance Monitor. Now firstly, we've got this timeline here appear under the graph. Now it's a small change, but it's a welcome one, although the graph still only shows the last 100 seconds. But the best change of all is that now we can display or remove items from our graph by simply unchecking or checking the box next to the appropriate counter. You see, often when displaying a whole lot of counters, this graph here can get a little muddled and difficult to see what's going on. So being able to easily remove and add counters really helps to clean up this interface. Of course, if you want to highlight a particular counter, let's say our processor time here, simply select the counter at the bottom, and then click on this little highlight icon here at the top, and then it will show that object darker on the graph so that it stands out. Now also, if you want to change the colors of the lines in the graph, and often you will want to because sometimes it gets a little hard to see, simply double click on one of the items in the list below, and from this drop down box here, you can change it to a color of your choice. Also, if you want to change the look of this graph into another type of graph, if we click on this little down arrow icon here next to this graph icon, we can change this line graph into a histogram bar and a report. And often I find that the raw data of a report is useful, as it's sometimes easier to see all of these values at once rather than trying to decipher pretty pictures. Okay, well, as I said earlier, this graph is really only useful for finding out what's happening on your system right now. But if you're looking for a more in-depth analysis of what's happening on your computer over a longer period of time, then you're going to want to create a log. And we'll talk more about how to do this shortly when we come to data collector sets. Okay, well, the next option we have here in our reliability and performance monitor is the reliability monitor, and this is a new and rather cool feature of Vista. Now, this tool measures the stability of your computer from the moment you first install Windows Vista, and then it gives it a progressive score from 10 all the way down to 1. Now, I say 10 down to 1 because the system starts with a perfect score of 10 when you first install Vista, and then from there, well, it can only go down, and of course it will go down in reliability as soon as you start using the computer and then installing applications and so on. Alright, well, here we can see that my computer started with an expected score of 10 when Vista was first installed, and as time has progressed, it's gradually gotten less reliable, and this can be for a variety of reasons, such as poorly behaving applications, software being installed and uninstalled, and so on. But what's important here is being able to identify what was the cause of the reliability of your system going downhill. Now, over here on the right, you can see what the current score of your computer is based on any selections you make here. So at present, we can see that I'm currently running 9.34, which is pretty good. Now, in the bottom part of our graph here, beneath these double lines, you'll expect to see icons that represent a problem or some information about what occurred on your system. And if you look over the right here, you'll see that these icons correspond to these different parts of the systems. Now, I only have one entry here, this informational one, so if we click on that, down the bottom here, we can see that the cause of this was a definition update for Windows Defender. We can see the version, what happened, the activity status, so we can see that our installation was successful, and we can see when it occurred. So by looking at this date here, I can tell that roughly about 3 weeks ago, I installed this definition update. And over time, you'll expect to see this graph going up and down, and you'll see errors and informational events all being logged in here, and it will show you exactly what's happening with your system when these conditions occurred. Now, what I really like about this tool is it enables you to go back over the history of your machine since you first installed Vista and see what happened when you started experiencing problems, and then perhaps you can go and address that problem. So if you're seeing your graph start at 10 and it's gradually sort of going up and down just slightly, and all of a sudden, wham, it drops down sharply, it's nice to be able to go back and take a look and find out what happened on that particular day. Maybe you installed an application. Well, if the performance of your system suddenly dropped after installing that application, well, now you have some information to act on, and then you can determine whether you really need that application, whether there's an alternate application, whether there's a patch that'll fix that problem. So it's a pretty cool feature, and I reckon over time, a lot of people are going to start using it. Alright, well, the next option we have here in our console is data collector sets. In previous versions of Windows, you'd have an option beneath the performance logs and alerts heading to create logs. In Windows Vista, this functionality has been moved to data collector sets, and it's also been significantly improved. So firstly, if we expand data collector sets, we've got 4 options here underneath. There's user-defined collector sets where we'll be creating our own custom collections, and then there's 3 built-in ones for the system. And if we expand this, you'll see that it covers network diagnostics, system performance, and also wireless diagnostics. Now, I will point out that in order to run a data collector set on a Windows Vista machine, you will either need to be using an administrator's account or at least be part of the built-in performance log users group. So if you're not an administrator, you will need to have an administrator do two things to enable you to start or modify a data collector set. So we'll click on Start, we'll right-click on Computer and we'll select Manage, and we'll click Continue. And then we'll expand Local Users and Groups and we'll select Groups. Now in the right-hand side here, we can see Performance Log Users Group. Now firstly, you'll need to ensure that any non-administrators accounts are listed in here. And secondly, we'll need to edit the local security policy to grant this group the rights to log on as a batch job. So we'll click on Start, we'll choose our administrative tools and we'll launch the local security policy and we'll click Continue. Alright, now we'll expand local policies and we'll select User Rights Assignment. And in the right hand side here, we'll scroll down and we'll select Log On as a batch job. And then we'll right click, we'll choose Properties. And in here, you'll need to add in the Performance Log Users group. Okay, now once you've done that, we can now run one of these inbuilt collector sets. And to do that, it's as simple as right-clicking on one of them. So let's choose, say, our System Performance one here. We'll right-click on it and then choose Start. Now, whilst this is running, if we expand Reports and then System and then our System Performance, you'll see here that a report is already being built for our System Performance data collection. Now, if you want to stop this collection from running, you can either click on this little black square here in the top, or you can right-click on the collection and then choose Stop. But since this will be a rather quick collection, I'm going to leave it to do its thing. Okay, it's done. Our little play icon, if you like, the little triangle has disappeared from our System Performance data collector set, so we know it's finished. In fact, you can also see here that the black square is now grayed out. So if we come down here to our report, and we'll click on this, and what we'll get back is a rather detailed report about our system. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this information since it's a bit too much to discuss right here and now, but we can quickly take a look at the key elements. Okay, well at the top here, we can see the machine that we've run this report against, which is this one, Vista Client 01, and the report ran today, and it ran for 1 minute. Now in our summary section here, we'll get a summary of our CPU, disk, memory, and network utilization. And if we scroll down a little bit lower here, underneath our diagnostic heading, we can see a quick status of our 4 key performance areas. And the green icons here are showing that everything's okay. Now if we scroll right down, we can further discover what the performance report found with our CPU, network, disk, and memory. So let's expand one of these. We'll expand, say, CPU, and then say process. And here we'll get a breakdown of the processes that were running on our system and the amount of CPU time that they were taking up. And if we scroll down, we can see a whole lot more information about what these processes were up to on our system. Now finally, right down the bottom, if we expand Report Statistics, we can view information about what our report collected on our system. So as you can see, a simple couple of clicks and we have this detailed report about our system, which will be saved out to our perf logs directory on your C drive by default. So if we click on Start and fire up Computer and go to our C drive, and then this perf logs directory, now we'll go to our System directory, Performance, and finally today's date, and there's all of the files there that make up our report. Now the main 2 files you're going to be interested in this folder is this report HTML file, which you can simply launch in your browser, and this is going to show you the same report we just looked at in the console, and this performance counter object. And if we double click this, and then click Continue, this will open up in the reliability monitor. So if we go and select that, there's our graph. Now obviously it's a little messy since it contains a lot of objects that we monitored, so just like before, we can clean this up and only show the objects that we're interested in. Now, if we no longer need this report, we can go and right-click on it, and we can choose to delete it, and we can even print it out if we like. Okay, so that's an inbuilt report, and you can run any of these at your own leisure. So let's go and take a look at creating our own. So we'll right-click on User Defined, and we'll select New Data Collector Set. Okay, well, the first thing we'll need to do is to give our data collector set a name, and I would suggest at least making this name logical so that it identifies the type of data you're collecting. So if it's a collection about your hard disk, name it disks or something appropriate. So I'm just going to call mine hard disk. And next we'll need to choose whether we want to create our collection using an existing template or to create one manually. Now if we leave the default here and click Next, you can create a data collector set from any of these three built-in templates: the basic, system diagnostics, or system performance, and there's a description over here on the right so you can see what each template entails, or if you have your own, you can click on the Browse button and then locate it using Windows Explorer. Alright, well let's go and click the Back button, and we'll create one manually. So we'll select that and click Next. Now we'll need to create a data log or a performance counter alert. So what's the difference? Well, a data log is exactly that. It simply logs data that you can look at later on, and in many cases, this is what you'll want to see in a historical report. The performance counter alert allows you to set thresholds and notify you when conditions occur, such as disk space hitting a certain level, or perhaps you've got long disk queues. So let's choose a performance counter and we'll click Next. And then we'll need to add in any counters that we want in our collection, so we'll click the Add button. And we're back at the same window we saw earlier, so let's just use the same logical disk counters that we did earlier. So we'll select logical disk, and we'll click the Add button, and then we'll click OK. Now we can change the sampling interval if we like from 15 seconds to another value, but I'm happy to leave that as it is, so we'll click Next. And we can choose where we want our data to be saved, and the default in our perflogs directory on our C drive is fine, so we'll choose Next. And now we can choose an account to run our data collector set with. Now the default here is set to System, and that's fine, so I'm going to leave that default. Now we can open the properties for this data collector set. We could start it collecting data now, or simply save this collector and close the wizard. So I'm going to choose to start it now, and we'll click Finish. Alright, well there's our new data collector set created, and as you can see it's now changed to running, and it's going to start collecting data immediately. Now you might have also noticed that down the bottom here in the report section we also now have a report by the same name as our data collector set we've just configured, so at any time we can stop the data collection and take a look at our report. Okay, so let's stop this collection. We'll click on our hard disk data collector set and we'll choose to stop it. Now we'll go and expand our hard disk report folder and we can choose our report. Okay, there's our report which shows a graph of the disk counters running on our system, and like before we can hide and show items on the graph. We could right click on it and we could save this as an image, and we can of course email it to other people and so on. Okay, now if we right click on our hard disk collector set, we can now also choose to save this as a template for future reports to be built upon. And if we take a look at the properties, and then the Schedule tab, we can then add in a schedule to run this report at a later time. And this can be useful if you know that at certain times of the day the system is slow but you're not sure why, then scheduling this collector to start later on can really help. Now on the Stop Condition tab, we can set the collector to stop collecting data after a certain period of time, or when it reaches a certain size. Now it's important to understand that if you don't specify any options here in this tab, then the data collector set is going to continue to collect data indefinitely until you manually stop it or your system runs out of disk space. Okay, so we can set an overall duration here, or time that our collector is going to run, and we can set these limits here to our collection either instead of or in addition to the overall duration, of course, such as if it reaches a certain maximum size. Alright, now the final tab we have here is the Task tab, which we could use to run a task when our data collector set stops, and you could write a script, for example, to email you and notify you when your data collector is finished. Okay, well, so far we've looked at the tools used to determine whether or not Windows Vista is running fine. So let's move on and we'll take a look at the tools we can use to make Windows run better. Now, before we get started, I do want to quickly point out one tool that's new in Windows Vista, and that's the Windows Experience Index tool. And whilst I've heard a lot of people's opinions about this tool, both good and bad, in my opinion, the idea behind it is a good one. Now, since I'm running this Windows Vista computer over a remote desktop connection to a virtual machine, which has problems running this tool, I'm going to quickly switch over to a new machine on my network. Okay, well, I've just connected via remote desktop to another machine in my network here, so we'll click on Start, we'll right-click on Computer, and we'll select Properties. Now, right here, in the middle of this screen, we can see the Windows Experience Index score for this computer. Now, if for some reason you don't see a score here written in blue, or perhaps you do see one but it's grey, that might indicate that you've recently added or changed your system hardware. So we'll click on Windows Experience Index, and then we can choose to update our score. So what's this score all about? Well, it's a combination of key performance indicators on your computer, including the memory, the CPU, the hard disk, and your graphics card. And the overall score here is based on the lowest score you get from any of these components. So you can see here my processor has been given a score of 4.8. My overall score, of course, is the same as my lowest score, which is 4.8. So if you do see this score written in grey and not in blue, click on this Update My Score link, and then Windows is going to go out and test this hardware to see what overall score you get. Now, the first thing that's important about this score is that if this score here is too low, then Windows Vista is automatically going to turn the Windows Aero interface off. So that's one purpose of this tool, to see if your system has the required grunt to be able to run Aero. Now, the second purpose is one that I kind of have to admire Microsoft for introducing. The idea is that for a lot of people that aren't particularly savvy with computers, and some members of my own family come to mind there, if you were to ask a couple of members of my family what sort of CPU they have, for example, they'd have no idea. And I doubt that they even know what a CPU actually is. So for those sorts of people, the idea is that they'll be able to go into a computer store or an online software store and buy software that they know will run on their computer simply by knowing their Experience Index score. Now, granted, it will be a while before you can walk into your local computer store and buy software labelled with a Windows Experience Index score of 2 or greater. But the concept Microsoft have here is a good one, and time will tell if this will be adopted by the computer population. Now, the next performance improvement feature I want to talk about is the new Readyboost feature of Vista. All you need is a flash memory device like a USB key, and any recently released key should be good enough, as they do need to be fast, since this key, when you plug it into your system, will be used as an additional memory cache. And since memory is much faster than hard disk, this additional cache should make your overall system faster. So when you plug in a compatible USB key into one of your USB ports, Vista will automatically detect it, and you'll get this autoplay menu. And down the bottom here, we have this Speed Up My System using Windows Readyboost link. So we'll select that. And now we can choose to either not use this device, or to use this device and reserve up to 4 gig of flash memory for Vista to use as a cache. Now, even though this particular USB key I have here is an 8 gig one, the maximum amount of memory Vista will allow Readyboost to use is 4 gig, so if you are planning on buying a new memory stick just for Readyboost, buying any more than 4 gig really is a waste. But that said, you can still access the extra memory, in my case that's the other 4 gig, as regular space, so it's not totally wasted. Now, another thing that Windows Vista does straight out of the box is to defragment your hard drives, and defrag software makes drives run faster as the software takes all of your data and reorganizes it on the hard disk so it's stored closer together, so that when it's accessed, the drive heads don't need to go all over the disk to find the bits of data it needs. Instead, it's all there in a row for quicker access. So we'll open up Windows Explorer by clicking on Start and then Computer, and we'll right click on a hard drive, which is getting close to being full here, and we'll choose Properties. Now we'll select the Tools tab, and we've got two options here that are really of interest. Now the first is to scan our hard disk for errors, and whilst this isn't really a performance enhancing tool, it's still good to run it, especially on new drives, since it can mark dud sectors on your disk so you don't write data to it, which you could potentially lose. And to run it, it's as easy as clicking on this Check Now button and choosing either of these two options to automatically fix any file system errors and to scan for and attempt to recover any bad sectors. So personally, when I put a new drive in my system, I like to run these two just to be sure, since I've had my fair share of dud hard drives over the years, and if these tools find a problem, it's nice to know that before I go and put all my valuable data on it. Okay, well the next option we have here is to defrag our hard disk, so we'll select Defragment now. And by default you can see that our defrag is set to run on a schedule at 1 AM every Wednesday. And we could certainly change it if we like by simply modifying our schedule here. Or we could choose to defrag our hard drive right now. Now, a word of warning, if you click Defragment now, you can see you don't get any sort of progress bar or indication telling you how long it's going to take. So if you have a large hard drive, I'd set this to run and leave your computer on overnight, because if you run it whilst you're actively using your computer, you're likely to notice a performance loss while it's going. Even though Microsoft have improved it so it now runs using a low priority disk and CPU process. In fact, Microsoft have published some information about why they don't provide a progress bar anymore like they did in Windows XP, as defragmentation isn't a linear process and the process bar wouldn't be accurate. But that said, I still think most people would like to see that progress bar here regardless. Okay, well the last thing I want to talk about here in this video is preventing applications from starting up when Windows starts. And so often on a busy system, you've got tools and applications and utilities that start when Windows starts, and they use valuable memory and waste system resources, especially when half the time you probably aren't even aware that they're even being loaded. So to streamline your system, it's a good idea to take a look at the applications that are being loaded, and you can see if you need them or not. And the tool of choice for finding out this information probably comes from an unlikely source, Windows Defender. So we'll click on Start and we'll open up the Control panel, and then we'll choose Security and then Windows Defender. Now we'll choose Tools, and then we'll launch Software Explorer. And right here, we'll get a list of all the applications that are scheduled to fire up when Windows starts, as well as any other applications that we're currently running. So from here you'll have an idea if there's software that you need to be running or software that is running that shouldn't be, such as in the case of spyware, which Windows Defender should be dealing with anyway. Okay, so in this video, we've looked at the tools you can use to maintain and optimize Windows Vista's performance. Obviously, the faster your computer goes, the happier most users are, so hopefully some of the tools and tips we've covered in this video will help you keep your Windows Vista computer running at its best.